Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Richard Wilson. I'm the Support Services Team Leader at the Baptist Union, and I'm delighted to be joined by our Treasurer, John. Hi, John.
Hello, welcome everyone, and good afternoon.
Great, it's good to have John with us. We're going to run through some slides today, so we're trying another sort of slightly different format of how these things work, but great to see a number of you already with us. If you do have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. We have some slides, we have some topics we thought we'd run through, but we're very much keen to meet your needs. So if there's any topic you particularly want us to cover, please do enter that. Some of them we'll get to as we go through the slides. Others we may cover at the end under Q&A. But we will try to cover all of your questions insofar as we can. We'll bring the knowledge that we have, but we don't promise to be able to answer every single question. But it'd be great to have your questions as we go along. So welcome to those who are already with us. I can see there's a good number of you already on the webinar, so that's great. So hopefully you can see the slides and myself and John at the same time. Here's an outline of the topics we're planning to cover. So we've got looking at income, we're going to look at costs, we're going to look at day-to-day financial operations, so practical life as a treasurer, what you need to do. We'll talk about the coronavirus financial support scheme that we've offered as the Baptist Union. Talk a bit about home mission and BMS World Mission. We'll talk a bit about operating hardship funds, which is a topic that I'm sure quite a number of churches are grappling with at the moment. Talk a bit about planning ahead, and we'll then do Q&A. So this YouTube broadcast is being recorded, so it will be available to replay. If you wish to pause and come back to it, you can do using the controls that you have hopefully on your screen or app. But yeah, please do come back and have a look later if there's anything you didn't quite catch the first time. We'll also be available if you email into the Union Support Services at baptist.org.uk after the event. We'll be happy to cover any topics that maybe we don't make quite clear, or if there's anything else that you have questions about, we're always happy to help our member churches. So, introduction. Step one, don't panic. I did think about putting up a graphic of Corporal Jones, but please don't be afraid of this situation. Our God is with us. He will get us through this. It may not be in the way that we would like, but the kingdom of God will not be overcome by coronavirus. So our role here is to carry on doing the job we have to the best of our abilities. So please don't be panicked, and please do remember that we as the staff at the Baptist Union are very much here to help you. If there is anything that is really concerning you, then please do get in touch. And part of that support for you is through webinars like these. So hopefully you will find this helpful. But please don't be panicked by this situation, and please be assured that our God is with us, and also that we at the Baptist Union are here as a family to help you. So we're going to go through a few topics. The first one I'm just going to cover. So sustaining income. So one of the things we've definitely seen in some of our churches, and it's a wide spectrum, but we've seen in some churches is a loss of income. And the two hits that we've seen churches reporting where we've been speaking to them has been a loss of the regular Sunday collection and a loss of lettings income. So for the regular Sunday collection, obviously there's people give in all sorts of different ways. I think it'd be fair to say the majority of churches now see the majority of their income come in via standing orders and bank transfers. And I think people, particularly in this time where it's harder to use checks or cash, are getting more used to making payments in that way. So if you want to contact your members and regulars who you think might be missing out on the opportunity to give, you should be able to fairly easily offer them the details of your sort code and account number, and they can make a transfer. And we have seen churches where that has worked to replace lost collection plate income. In fact, in some churches, we've seen that people are giving more in this way than they have historically. So there are, in some sense, financially, for churches, there are opportunities to encourage people to become more committed to their church. You may also find that there are ways of receiving online donations, so via a web page, and there are various ways of setting that up. Some established, so I'm sure many of you will have donated to charities via Just Giving, which is very well known. There are others out there. Give.net is the stewardship run one, and I know used by a number of charities. Gived, that's actually I believe a Swedish outfit, but they are particularly focused on church giving, and I think if you've got a Swedish accent, Gived sounds a bit like gift, and I don't have a Swedish accent, so it doesn't really quite work. But yeah, if you want, those are worth having a look at if you think that that might be helpful. I can see someone on the chat has just said Facebook Donate is another mechanism. So if you have a strong church Facebook presence, then that might be helpful. So it's just worth thinking through which of these are particularly applicable to your situation, and that there are many and various ways of collecting online donations. I've just named a few. Some of these can be quite helpful because they can sort out your gift aid for you, but if not, then you can still look at claiming gift aid if you've collected the appropriate information from donors, or if it comes in completely anonymously to you, then under gift aid small donation scheme. You could also receive checks. Now, obviously, this is a bit more painful. I think, John, you were telling me yesterday that you have had a few checks drop through your door as a church treasurer.
Either through the door or through the post from members in my church who are not comfortable with giving online or haven't been able to set up standing orders, but they're still keen to make their contributions.
So perhaps, if you get the message out that you can take a check still, and maybe either through your personal front door or maybe through the door of the church, if the church has a mailbox, then that might be appropriate, and an occasional trip out to clear the mailbox is, I think, entirely appropriate. And many banks are open, not all, but a number of banks are open to allow you to cash checks. Some banks, depends very much on your bank, some banks may allow you to cash checks by photograph. That's certainly applicable to some banks for their personal accounts, but depending on what sort of bank account you've got, you may be able to do that. You may also be able to send them in via post. So just look at those. But again, a bit more hassle. So generally, we would probably suggest you might want to try and encourage people down the direct transfer route. But if checks are the way they're giving you the money, then it helps to cash them. So that's how sort of getting donations in. Just on donations, obviously one of the things that is quite a substantial income stream for us all is around gift aid. One thing I do have to point out to people quite regularly is that there's nothing stopping you claiming gift aid more than once a year. Many churches seem to claim once a year, and I think that possibly dates back to the old Gift of Covenant days, when I think there were more restrictions. But gift aid is very flexible. You can claim very regularly. My own church, I claim quarterly, but there's nothing stopping you claiming monthly. Clearly, you can only claim the same money once. So you do need to keep careful track of what you have claimed for already. But perhaps if your church has a cash flow issue, this is quite a quick way to get additional money in, is just bringing your gift aid claim up to date. And the HMRC, if you use their online mechanisms, are pretty quick at paying. You'll usually have the cash in your bank within the week. So yeah, do look at that. Gift aid small donation scheme. So this is largely used on anonymous donations, usually via cash collection or contactless. Now we have had some update from HMRC on GASDS, or sometimes people call it GADS, but GASDS, a gift aid small donation scheme. Around, there was some concern that if people, when they get back to church, might hand in very large wads of cash, whereas they've previously given £10 every week. If it's 20 weeks, that would be £200. The limit on GASDS is £30 per donation. The HMRC have given a bit of guidance on this, that they're going to be fairly flexible in their interpretation of the rules. I don't believe they're actually going to change the written rules around the £30 limit, but I think they're going to be fairly flexible. John, did you say you've got the exact text of what they've said?
Yes, this has come through the Church's Legislation Advisory Service, of which we're a member, along with the other major denominations. And they've had a response from HMR officials, and I'll read out: in respect of GASDS, guidance on the eligibility for donations for inclusion in the scheme is clear in stating that claims can only be made on cash donations of £30 or less, and contactless card donations of £30 or less collected on or after 6th of April 2019. The decision over what constitutes an eligible donation is one for the church charity to make for themselves rather than for HMRC, but the conditions for something to be considered a small donation are clearly set out in legislation. Then in bold, where it is the case, for example, of separate donations being given in a single envelope, then if the church charity official is happy these are separate, clearly separate small donations and clearly stated as such, then they will be eligible for GASDS, as is the case where separate envelopes are used. So if with that, if people come along with a lump sum at the end of this period and they actually identify that those are their weekly gifts or whatever for each of the last 10, 12 weeks or however much it is, then those can be considered as individual donations of less than £30, and you can claim on those. So I think there's a recognition that with the situation we're in now, providing the people indicate that they're sort of regularly giving and a series of separate amounts, then you can claim the money back.
Cool. Okay, and that guidance is pretty recent. It's I think it's only out this week, so we will look to post that on our website when we hopefully later on today, or maybe over the coming days. So I can see somebody requested that. So lettings and
just come in there and answer.
Sorry, John.
Question. BUC are still carrying out the gift aid scheme for those churches.
So there are a small number of churches for whom Baptist Union has offered a service to claim gift aid for you. I would generally say most churches are able nowadays, with the way the system is configured, to do it themselves, but we still do that. So if you want us to do a claim for you, then please do let us know and we will get that done for you. Just finally on income, so lettings and tenants is a particularly big issue. We know we have got a leaflet that we've specifically issued around the legal issues around coronavirus. So leaflet L18, baptist.org.uk/resources/L18 has that. That has some more specific guidance, but there's some wisdom required on how you deal with external users of your premises. Where it's a formal tenancy agreement, then generally it's enforceable that you can ask them to continue paying rent, but you may wish to be thoughtful in how you do that. I'm sure as churches we'd want to be good landlords, and you may want to give some relief for churches as churches to your tenants if they are really financially struggling, and there may be good logic in that in terms of enabling your tenants to continue and keep paying you rent in future. But equally, if you've got informal hire arrangements like dance clubs or things like that, unless they're very clearly contractually written down, it might be hard for you to claim when they are clearly not able to use the building. Just a quick clarification, I can see Rosalie has asked that the GADS limit is £30. It did go up to £30, I think, April last year. So it was originally £20, it's now £30, which was originally raised in line with the contactless donation limit I believe contactless has actually gone up to £45 now. So, but we've seen no sign of the GASDS limit following that up as yet. So yeah, lettings to tenants much more complicated, depends on your individual situation. So look at leaflet L18. If that doesn't give you an answer, then do get in touch and we can talk about your specific circumstances. So let's move on. John, I think you're going to lead us through this section on costs.
Yep, that's right. So first of all, I want to look at ministry and staff costs. The key thing here is that you need to follow your terms of settlement for a minister and employment contracts for any staff you have. We do not recommend furloughing ministers unless they're part of a team ministry, and only then if their work for the church can be carried out by the remaining members of the team. If you furlough a minister, they can take no part in the life of the church, as there will be grey areas as to whether their participation is classed as work. We've got further details on our website on furloughing. If you furlough staff, then you should claim each month. Furlough periods must be for at least 3 weeks. You'll get 80% of pay as calculated on the February payroll, and you can only claim for staff who have been registered with HMRC. So remember that the rate paid by the government is going to be going down to 60% from the 80% from July. It's unlikely that there will be many savings from ministry costs, but some examples that you might have in your budget might be for, say, visiting preachers or speakers for special events. We suggest that you check with your minister whether his or her expenses are likely to change. Are they doing more or less mileage? Are they incurring extra costs for putting services online or for contacting and posting information to members, particularly those who haven't got access to online services? Moving on to HMRC. Once you send in your RTI schedule to HMRC at the end of each month, that's the schedule which shows what tax and national insurance you're due to pay, you may be able to delay payment of tax or national insurance beyond the usual payment dates. HMR has allowed this, but they've not always been consistent. But I'd only recommend you use this if your cash is very short and you know that you have extra cash coming in for soon. After all, this is a bill that will always have to be paid at some point. One saving that can be made is to make sure you're registered to get the national insurance relief for small employers. This is worth up to £2,000 per annum and has been running for a few years now and is still running this year.
I think actually the limit's gone up to £3,000 since the last budget, actually, John.
All right, okay. I wasn't sure whether that had actually come in yet. But yeah, I would say that for most churches, 2,000 will be sufficient for their national insurance. It doesn't cover tax, it's only national insurance. Looking at discretionary spend, we suggest that you look through your budgets and accounts and identify those items where the church has a choice whether to spend the money or not. Can these items be a source of saving money? Some of the things may be dear to your church's heart, but can they happen this year or are they necessary? Make sure you have a process in place to agree what can and shouldn't be spent. It shouldn't be just down to you as a treasurer. You need to have discussions with your deacons, leadership team, or whoever. However, there are some things you must not treat as discretionary, and these include insurance. Make sure that this continues to be paid, and also that you comply with the terms of the insurance. This will include a need to weekly inspect your church premises, even when the buildings are not being used. Also linked with that, make sure that you keep contracts in place. So, for example, if you've got fire alarms and protection alarms in your church buildings, again, if these are not working, you are likely to be breaking the terms of your insurance. So it's important to make sure that the contracts remain in place and you pay the annual servicing charge or whatever. Also, watch out for contracts such as servicing your heating boilers, where breaking the contract could lead you vulnerable to expensive repairs. So just be careful looking down those items of expenditure that come through. I've mentioned about looking at all discretionary spend, but bearing in mind where you're supporting outside organisations as a church, that they are also likely to be facing financial struggles. So look to supporting these if you can. Be aware of your local, if you're involved with your local food bank, for example, your CAP project or other services like that, who are working hard to meet needs during the lockdown. And then investing in what's important. There are some areas where you may want to spend more. This is particularly the case if you're putting services and other activities online, as you may need to buy extra licenses or equipment to do this well and legally. I'm aware that some churches are carrying out buildings improvements whilst their church buildings are empty. Whatever you choose to do, use the test that a church is the people of God in that location, and is your spending helping to enhance the witness of your church in your community? So we move on from managing costs to looking at day-to-day operations. First of all, obligations. So this is making sure you pay what you must pay. We've already mentioned include paying minister and staff, HMRC, also pensions. The pension trustees have to record when pension payments are not received, and if this is not corrected within a given period, then the church has to be reported to the pension regulator. There are very tight regulations on this. Certainly, if anything is more than 90 days behind, then that is a matter for report. If you rent premises, make sure you continue to pay the rent unless you come to some agreement with the landlord, and we suggest that should be in writing to allow a rent reduction or rent holiday. Make sure you also pay all your bills for utilities. With the good weather we've been having, gas and electricity bills should be virtually nil, but watch out for catch-up bills from the winter quarters if you've had estimated bills for the last quarters. How do we make payments during the lockdown? This can be a challenge. The best system is to use online banking with dual authorization of payments. But if this is not possible, then you need to put in place controls which will enable bills to be paid, but ensures you get proper authorization. This could be, for example, by email from another signatory on the bank account confirming that the payment can be made. Checks are more of a problem as they need to be signed in accordance with the bank mandate. Controls and record keeping. Now is the time to ensure that your record keeping is sound. This is particularly important where you may need to catch up with authorizations when you're able to meet people again. If you're receiving gifts from members on an ad hoc basis through the post or other means, then ensure you have a means of record keeping. This is particularly the case if you want to claim gift aid on the donations or the small donation scheme as well. Also, where you perhaps have got records at the church or can't access them at the moment, then make sure you have some duplicate records to track what is going on and enable things to be put in place afterwards when we meet again. We look at managing cash flow. Make sure you always have key cash to meet your payments. This may mean delaying some payments that do not need to be made immediately to ensure that you have enough for those that have to be paid. Pay particular attention to when direct debits leave your accounts to ensure funds are in place. If you have funds on deposit, how quickly can you access them? Do you need to give notice? If so, plan ahead to ensure notice is given so that you can draw the funds when needed. Don't do it too soon, otherwise you lose interest. Even the very small interest amounts now being paid are worth having. Is there any expenditure your church is expecting to occur which can be postponed? So I think there have been some questions that have come up on this. Donald has commented about using the post office to do banking. Yes, I think all the major banks, you can use the post office to pay in, and that certainly will be convenient for some people. Bearing in mind also that most bank branches in my area are only open from 10 till 2 each day. They're opening on more limited hours.
Yeah, I think one thing just to say, there's a little bit of comment about utilities. So it does sound like some water companies are being generous and not making any charges at all. Usually churches actually have quite low water charges because they often go on rateable value, and churches have a very low rateable value in. So I think my own church's water bill is like £10 or £13 a month. So, but do have a look at that. Make sure that you're being charged the right amount, because I don't believe churches should be charged on a full commercial rate. But also just watch out for utility bills on. Just one warning again from my anecdote from my own church is that our electric company, although we're on a smart meter, the electric company chose it for the April to May bill to go off an estimated reading for the first time ever, rather than using the red meat reading. And I have a slight feeling that was a bit of a cheeky attempt to keep their cash flow going. So do keep an eye on that, and you may want to take a manual reading and submit that, which is what I've done in that case. So just keep an eye on those sort of things. Depends how tight you are on cash flow. If you're not tight on cash flow, then you may not need to worry about these things. But John, sorry, you were going to come back in.
Yeah. Another couple of things. First of all, with my church, we're actually on a water meter, so that affects the way we're billed in our church. The other thing as well is this might be a time to, if you've got time, to review who your gas and electricity suppliers are if you haven't reviewed it for some time, to make sure that you're getting good rates, because if you're defaulting with a major supplier, you could be paying well over the odds for your gas and electricity supplies. And also make sure that you're only paying 5% VAT. Yes,
definitely true. If you need help with that, we have worked with a company called Utility Aid, and there's some detail of that on our website. They've done free bill checks for Baptist churches, and particularly I know some churches that have reclaimed 4-figure amounts because they've been overpaying. They've been paying commercial rate VAT rather than the 5% charity rate. So that's well worth having a look at. Brian, I think it is, has asked about whether you need to advise utility companies that the church is closed at the moment. I've not seen that as necessary, and in fact, I think it would be fair to note that they would understand that all churches are closed at the moment by order of the government. So that shouldn't be a major issue, and I don't think you equally need to inform Baptist Insurance, because they'll make it. They know that already. This is not a situation where you've abandoned the building by your choice. We are working under government constraints. So I don't think anybody is going to tell you off for not informing them that your building is closed.
I also come in there and just watch with utility companies. Don't, for example, switch off your electric if you've got alarm systems or things like that. You may be able to switch off your gas as a protection, particularly during the summer months when you're not using your heating. But just check before you switch off your electric that you're not switching off key systems that you need to continue to maintain.
No, thanks. just one thing, sorry, you'll see this in the chat if you're watching, but we've been corrected by a number of people. The employment allowance actually went up from 3,000 to 4,000 in April, so
Right.
we were both wrong.
Okay.
But yes, apologies for that. Thank you for keeping us honest and correct, those of you keeping an eye via the chat. So we don't claim to have all the answers. Sorry, somebody's asked about the 5% charity rate for VAT. So on energy bills, so gas and electric, charities are entitled to a 5% rate of VAT rather than the normal commercial rate of 20%. So if you check your gas or electric bill, do make sure that you're getting that rate. If you're not, you need to contact your utility provider to do a simple form to claim that. Some utility providers will ask you for a charity number. If you are a registered charity, that's obviously very easy. If you're not a registered charity, you should explain to them that you're an accepted charity, and they should understand that. If they don't, you might need to put that in writing, but they should be applying the 5% rate. And again, as I say, if you get stuck with that, then Utility Aid do offer a free service to help you go through that. So do take a look at that. Just search for Utility Aid on our website and you'll find it, or just Google Utility Aid and you will find them. So we're going to move on. Going to talk about the Coronavirus Financial Support Scheme. I hope most of you have already heard about this because we have tried quite hard to communicate it. So we're aware that churches may be finding sort of times of stress at the moment, and we don't want to add to that. So where a church has a Baptist Together loan, we are offering an initial 3-month payment holiday for all loans and that's covering April, May, and June. And for projects where the project is active, we've offered a 3-month interest-free period. So that's essentially saying that if the project's been paused for 3 months, which I think is probably what will be the case on many projects, then we are offering an interest-free period to essentially mean that you're not in a different position when we come out of lockdown as to where you were at the beginning. So that is obviously something we're trying to do to support churches. That's only for Baptist Together loans. Some people have loans from the Baptist Building Fund. I'm afraid that isn't us, so we don't have control of that. You will need to talk to the Baptist Building Fund about their provisions.
But I understand they are sympathetic. Yes.
So, but we can't speak for them because they are a legally separate organisation, yeah. So you will need to be in touch with them. The second thing we've been doing is some support for all churches available. So we've been offering grants of up to £10,000. And we have made available interest-free loans of 25,000 or more. We're actually not, under the law, we're not allowed to offer loans of 25,000 or less than 25,000. So that's why that constraint is in there. But if people need bigger sums than 10,000, then 25,000 loan is available. We've had quite a number of applications for the £10,000 grants. Not actually as much as we feared we might, but yeah, we have seen a few tens of churches come in for those sorts for financial support in that way, and we're delighted to be able to do that. The criteria is that you can, for both of those, is you can apply when you're down to 2 months of expenditure in cash. So if your expenditure is £3,000 a month, if your bank balance is less than £6,000, then get in touch and we'll pay out when you've got 1 month of expenditure in cash. Now, the assumption is that you may well still have some income coming in from donations. So that should, that's not 1 month away from running out of money usually. If you've got money that is legally restricted, then we ignore that for the purpose of those calculations, because you shouldn't be spending that on general purposes. That needs to be spent for the purposes for which it was restricted. For designated monies, you should be reallocating that because that's within the control of your trustees. If you need any explanation of what designated and restricted funds are, then you can see the finance leaflets on our website, or but you do need to check back on how those funds were structured. And we do ask that you take reasonable steps to reduce deficit. What we don't mean there is removing all of your employees, but it's looking at particularly discretionary spend and some of the things John talked about a couple of slides ago. So hopefully most of you have come across that. It's explained on the website. There are application forms there. We know many of you have taken that up, but don't be afraid to apply. I have come across a church or two that go, well, we're not that badly off, but we're going to have to furlough our minister and we're running out of money to do anything. And to which the answer is, well, yes, if you're running to the point where you've run out of money to pay your minister, then you should be asking for this support, and we would encourage you to do so. So please don't be reticent or feel that it's not fair. We appreciate that some churches have been very hard hit by this situation. That is that. Simon, you've just asked just the right question at just the right moment. I don't know if John planted that one with you, but thank you for asking that question. John is just about to answer your question.
Yes, so in April, we saw home mission income fall by 25% in the month. That varied across the country. Some areas were much higher than that, others were lower. But this is certainly from messages we've got back from associations, has reflected churches stopping giving as they assess their finances following the closure of church premises. Obviously, during April, then people were unclear as to quite where things were going and how things were going forward, and what income was going to come in. I hope you will have seen our letter that was issued at the beginning of the week, which sets out two requests. First of all, if your church has stopped giving, we ask whether you could review your finances for April, and if possible, can you recommence giving at a lower level, as that will be a big help. We realise that some churches, the finances have been hit very badly. You've already heard about the grants we're giving out to those who are in particular difficulty. And of course, they're not able to give to home mission in the same way. We're aware of others where income has become quite tight, but if there is something for home mission, that would help. And secondly, if your church's finances have only had a limited impact from the building closures, can you make an additional donation to home mission to make up for those churches which cannot now afford to give? This is going to have the fall in income. If this continues, is going to have a significant impact both on the Baptist Union teams, the associations, and also grants to churches. And grants to churches or projects mean there are people in those roles, and if income is not maintained, then support will be threatened for those areas.
So yes, John, I think I'd just add to that to say that we are very aware that the financial impact of this situation on churches has fallen very unevenly.
Yes.
So some churches in some areas are very dependent on income from lettings and use of the building. And obviously they are really being hit very hard at the moment. And we've seen a number of them apply for the grants we've talked about on the previous page. But then there are other churches who maybe some of their discretionary expenditure has just not been able to be spent, but the money is still rolling in. And so actually they're better off than they have been. And we'd be encouraging you to think about how you can deploy that excess. If you are seeing your income drop off, then clearly it is appropriate for you to consider how you proportionately adjust what you're spending.
Yeah. Also come in there and say your church's situation will obviously impact this. For example, with the news from Rolls-Royce in Derby this year, then perhaps churches in the Derby area are going to be impacted by members' ability to be able to give. People in churches in holiday areas, which have heavy reliance on hospitality, are likely to be harder hit, as are churches where a good proportion of the congregation may work in airports or the airline industries. So there will be variations around the country, and we recognise that. But what we're asking for is that where you have money available and can afford, then please give, or if you can, even give a little more.
Yeah, there's a couple of people in the chat have said that they give 5% to us and 5% to BMS, and of their general fund income, and then that's what we ask. I think it would be fair to say that if all of our churches did that, that we would actually have more money to spend, and would be able to offer more support to you. But unfortunately, not every church feels they're able to do that. So, but yes, no, we're very grateful for everybody who supports us in whatever way. And there are some churches who give more than that, and again, we're very grateful for that. And we hope that we can continue to support you in the way that we have been.
And we also ask that equally you support BMS World Mission, who will be in a similar position, because there will be those churches who will not be able to support BMS in the way that they have done, and therefore BMS also will be seeing a shortfall in the money that they're receiving in.
Yep. No, thanks, John. So we'll move on from this.
Move on to the,
John.
Next area. Can I pick up there's been discussion about designated money.
Yeah.
Designated money is, you can choose to use that however you want. Basically, designated means that as a church, as leaders, deacons, trustees, you've decided to set aside some money for a specific purpose, and you've identified that separately in the accounts, but it is money that can be used for general purposes. You can make a decision at the deacons, trustees meetings or wherever to say, no, we need it for other purposes at the moment, and can use it for general funds. That's the distinction between designated and restricted, where you have no choice, but in restricted funds you have to use it for the purposes for which the money was given.
Yep. So if you did a collection for building project and said this is for the building project, then that money is restricted, and you can only spend it on the building project, or you'd have to return it to the donor or ask the donor for their permission to spend it on something different. If on the other hand you just said here is a collection and we might set some money aside for the building project, then that's general fund income.
I'll just pick up on Brian's comment as well on that, is that if you got a building project or something like that, you need to be careful how you ask your members for money, because if you ask them for a specific building project, then you can only use that money for that specific building project. So it's best that you actually ask for money that can be used for that building project. But if you get more money in, or it doesn't go ahead in the way that's intended, that the deacons and church can decide other ways in which that money can be used. In which case you can have the money as designated. If you're too specific, then it becomes restricted.
Cool. Now, thank you, John. Let's move us on. So one of the other things actually, and it does relate into restricted and designated funds, is around hardship funds. So many of you, as John said, some people are going to be are going to have very severe impact of coronavirus on their personal finances. And many of our churches have for many years, it dates back a long way in the Baptist tradition, have a fellowship fund or a hardship fund, which will support usually members or those in strong relationship with the church in times of trouble. Now, a lot of this dates back to the 1600s, when Baptists were fairly heavily persecuted, and therefore, were not likely to get any support from the state or any other outside party if they were in financial difficulty. But this is something that still runs in the modern era, albeit probably in a less significant way than it might have done in those times. There are several ways these are run. Some it's just a budget line where a church says, in our budget we set aside £1,000 a year for this purpose, and other churches it's a specific fund within their accounts where they ask for donations into it, and it might be a designated fund or a restricted fund. Obviously, if the donor says it's for this purpose, then it's restricted. If the donor gives and says you could put it into that if you want, then you can make it designated. We have a specific leaflet on operating fellowship funds. It was revised relatively recently, so I think it's still pretty good. So do read that if you're thinking about that sort of thing in this context. I would say that you do have to apply wisdom. Not everybody's concept of hardship is the same, and so one person might say I'm in hardship because I can't afford my third car. Another person might say I'm in hardship because I literally cannot feed the children. As I say, a little bit of wisdom is needed, and you need to think a bit about that. One significant flag, particularly in our churches, is that there are very strong legal constraints on giving grants to trustees, and which often include, well, will almost always include the church minister and their close relatives. So wife, children, generally in the close relative, but there's some interpretation in that's required. So essentially there are very strong constraints in charity law around trustees benefiting from the charity they are on the board of. So you really have, not least of which is every gift, grant to a trustee must be declared in the annual report in the following year. And if your cumulative grants to trustees in a calendar year, or in a 12-month cycle, are going to go past £1,000, you need the prior written consent of the Charity Commission to make that grant. So you just can't give it. You would be breaking the Charities Act if you were to give a grant of over £1,000. So significant sort of health warning there, but do read leaflet F09. You can see the URL there. If you know the number of one of our leaflets, that URL structure works. So baptist.org.uk/resources/ and then leaflet number, in this case F09. So please do take a look at that if you're thinking about operating hardship funds. So we will move on to the next bit. John, you're going to talk a bit about
just before moving on. I think in terms of the hardship funds, what used to be common across churches, and it's much less common now, is that an offering was taken at communion, and that would be used to fund the hardship fund. Yep. Whether your church is still doing that, I don't know, but that has been one source of where funds have been raised for a hardship fund.
Yeah, and on that basis, that money collected will be a restricted fund, because it's been collected for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
So planning ahead.
Planning ahead. Well, how do we do that with so many uncertainties? First of all, I would ask, have you actually revised your budget for this year in terms of doing a forecast to the end of the year? For my own church, I've assumed that we will not use the church building until next year, not because I have any particular insights or word from the Lord, but this makes it easier to understand the numbers and is likely to be the worst case position for many churches. If things resume sooner, then more of the original budget can be adopted. But if you try and do a revised forecast for the next 3 or 4 months and then revert to your original budget, and things don't happen as planned in terms of the building opening, then it could be get quite messy with your forecasts. So my suggestion is look at the church building being closed until the end of the year and work backwards from there. If this is a difficult year, how do we budget for next year? Firstly, my advice would be don't put together a detailed budget too early. It's likely to be more wrong than usual. I suggest scenario planning. This is thinking through the implications of various scenarios and what impact that could have. For example, what happens if churches can hold services but social distancing is in place. What issues does that raise for your church in terms of who will be able to come, what impact that will have on the offerings, and also recognizing that you'll be incurring full costs for e.g. gas, electric and other utilities, but may still be having reduced income. What happens if shielded people still cannot mix in church situations? How does that affect your church? This may be a particular issue where you've got a majority older congregation and those with various health problems. What if churches still can't hold services into next year? What will be the impact then? But also those are looking on the negative side. There's the new normal as well. Don't expect everything to be the same as they were before the lockdown. Some of you may be reluctant to come to church even if it is open, particularly those with health conditions. We don't know yet if a vaccine will be found which is effective. Until such time, there remains a risk of the virus erupting again. Even if one is found, it will need most of the population to be inoculated for people to feel safe. We're always hearing of job losses, so people in certain industries and sectors are going to be hard hit for quite a time. I mentioned that just a short while ago. But I want to finish on a more positive note. In my own church, we have found that putting services online has allowed our housebound members to feel much more part of the church, and they are now leading part of our ongoing prayer ministry. We have also established contact with people outside of our church family, some who we've lost contact with, who we had links with in the past, others who we've had no contact with at all. We're now beginning to think through how these benefits can continue once we are back in our building. Do we actually continue with all our services in our building, or do we continue with some online? These are big questions that you need to think through as your church as a whole. So it's a question of in readiness for budgeting next year, that there's some big questions that you need to ask amongst your diaconate leadership teams with your minister. And then from that, do your budget for next year. But I would suggest try and leave it till the fourth quarter of this year.
Thanks, John. Just to stop for a second, we have had a little bit of conversation on the chat around hardship funds, where churches might have been given particular funds for an individual who is a trustee. I think you are in a tricky position in those circumstances. What might be worth considering, as something I've considered on this topic in the past, is to set up you can these days buy prepaid card accounts like MasterCard, prepaid MasterCard. It used to be the sort of thing you did with travelers checks, but you can charge them up. So you could potentially say, look, we're collecting this card for this person. Here's the details of how you can add money onto it as individuals. And then that could be seen as keeping the money separate from the church. You just have to be really careful. If the money is in any way under the control of the trustees, then the criteria I said before about it must be declared in the annual report as a specific disclosure, even if it's 10p, I'm afraid. And it also, if it goes over £1,000 in aggregate for all trustees in a 12-month period, then you need specific charity commission consent to enable you to do that. If there are specific other questions, I can see some requests, John, for a write-up of your scenario planning in the new normal text. So we might see if we can get that out afterwards.
Yes, I might put up a paper that I produced for association treasurers and adapt that, so it may not quite tie in with the wording from today, but I think it'll be a better paper for you.
And of course, don't forget that today's webinar is recorded. So if you want to come back and play it and play that section later, then you will be able to do that. In fact, if you want to go back right now, I believe you can rewind on YouTube just by sliding the blob back, and you can then you can do that. Mandy's asked a question about trustees' expenses. Yes, you do need to disclose trustee expenses in your annual report. Where they are reimbursement of costs for the charity, the rules are slightly different. That's not a grant, that's a reimbursement of trustee expenses, and that's generally allowed. But you do need to declare in your annual report the total amount and how many trustees benefited from that. You don't need to declare Bob had 50 quid of expenses and Fred had 30. But if you made a grant to somebody for their own use of £30, then you have to say, we gave Bob a grant of £30 as a charity. If Bob is a trustee, you have to declare that as an individual payment. Similarly, if you've made a payment to a trustee for services, again, the rules are slightly different again, then you have to declare that too. And you have to declare the purpose for which it was. But as long as you can your trustees are satisfied that it was best value for the charity, then that's okay. But you do need to disclose it. So finally, we're going to just touch on financial reporting. And given we've just been talking about annual reports, that fits quite neatly. So your obligations remain broadly the same as normal. There is nothing annual reports and accounts need to be generated and filed. If you're a registered charity, which would have to file your accounts with the Charity Commission, then they have offered, I think they're being fairly liberal about allowing filing extensions. So the email address is on the screen for if you want to go for a filing extension. So you can have an extra 3 months to submit your annual report. Normally, I think you have, I can't remember, 9 or 10 months, but so you've still got a reasonable time anyway. But if you feel you're not going to be able to make that deadline, then do make use of that. Just one aside on furlough grants. So if you are getting a furlough grant from the government, under UK regs, you have to account for that as income as a government grant in the period it relates to. The period you can't sort of offset it against your payroll costs. So you have to show the income line and the total payroll cost as a cost, and the income line and the grant income as an income. You can't offset the two. And the final thing is, if you're in the middle of doing a trustee report at the moment, then in principle, your trustee report should comment on the impact of coronavirus and any risk to going concern at the point of signature.
I think just to emphasise on that last point, even if your report is for last year, you still have to include the impact of coronavirus, which is a this year event.
Yes, the key point is at the point of signature.
Yes.
So going concern, almost all accounts are prepared on a going concern basis, and that means essentially you're operating as a charity that continues to be able to operate. Doesn't think you're closing down or so severely running out of money you won't be able to continue to operate and meet your debts as they fall due. But you need to sign. That's at the point of the accounts being signed that test applies, not as at the end of the previous financial year. So if you're currently about not yet signed your say 2019 accounts, then you do need to consider whether coronavirus is impacting on your ability to continue operating, and we would hope it would not. And if it is, then we would be happy to hear from you for a grant. Just one other aside, sorry, probably ought to have put it on the slide. The Charity Commission and alongside the Scottish Charity Regulator and the Northern Ireland Charity Regulator have published some guidance for independent examiners around coronavirus. It's on the CC, the main independent examiners guidance leaflet is called CC 32. If you search for CC 32 on the page where CC 32 is published, there is a particular guidance leaflet around independent examination at this time and any issues that arise. So do take a look at that. So that is
I come in there just to answer Brian's comment about the trustee report. This is the report. Yeah, it probably is normally written by the church secretary, but it's the report you should be submitting to the Charity Commission with your accounts if you have to submit to the Charity Commission.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's an internal document. Well, it's an internal document for the church, but it's also a publicly available document. So anybody in the public can always ask for your report and accounts each year.
Yep. So if you're a registered charity, then you have to produce an annual report that gets submitted to the Charity Commission. Just going to move the slides forward, but I think the next thing we've got is Q&A. If you have any questions, we've tried to cover things as they've come up in the chat, but and thank you for those who have contributed to that. If you have other questions, we are happy to keep going. So Ian and Rosie, Lucas, I don't know whether that's Ian or Rosie or both of you, have asked about what about being unable to hold an AGM. So as a general starting point, we'd probably say the first thought process is, can we just delay? So can you wait until you're able to meet again to hold an annual general meeting? The next best thing is it sensible to try and hold an electronic version of an AGM, so via, say, Zoom or Skype or some other multi-party conference calling service? That may or may not be appropriate depending on the scale of your church. It's important that everybody's able to see and hear each other for that to, or certainly to be able to hear and participate in the conversation for that to be effective. But there is more guidance on that in leaflet L18, I should just say. If you have specific concerns about your specific church situation, then do get in touch with us. We're happy to help on those. We have been advising a number of churches, particularly where there are more complicated decisions that are needing to be taken. But as a general rule, if your AGM has to be deferred, then even if it's not quite complying with your normal constitutional practices, then the Charity Commission particularly being fairly lenient on any of that. Andrew,
we put various guidance on the Baptist Together website on these legal issues about AGMs, church meetings, and governance issues, which are the questions coming up at the moment. So I suggest you have a look at the guidance there, and then if you've got any questions following that, then if you contact the legal team, then they will be able to guide you through.
Absolutely, yeah. Leaflet L18 has all of those topics in it. So I've got the URL for that on the next page. Go on, we'll flick forward to the next page. So no, I didn't. Oh, sorry, I didn't put the URL there. But leaflet L18 is all these legal issues around governance and AGM issues. So please do take a look at that leaflet. We won't go through all of that detail today, otherwise we could be here for some time. Andrew, interesting question. Has anyone been challenged on whether a claim under the CJRS, that's the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, so the furlough scheme, as so many people call it, is appropriate for a church that could continue to operate without it? So there is actually no constraint on the furlough scheme as to whether you actually need the money or would have to stop without it. The question is are you putting people on furlough? So if you furlough someone, that means that they stop working. They can't volunteer you. They can't volunteer back for you. So you can't furlough your minister and he volunteers and carries on doing the same job anyway. That would be fraud, and we definitely would not recommend that. And we would expect you to be challenged if that was uncovered. And we do expect that the HMRC will retrospectively audit a sample of claims under CJRS. So you please don't. And I think as churches, we absolutely should be whiter than white on this. So please don't try to bend those rules, because I don't think that brings glory to God at all. But if you have legitimately furloughed a member of staff, say you've got a cleaner that is on your staff and the building is not being cleaned at the moment, so you furlough them and you claim it's irrelevant actually whether your church had the money to keep paying for that or not. Now, it's up to you. You may take an ethical choice that says, actually, we don't feel it's ethical to claim money we don't need. That's your choice. I think that's a much more open conversation as to whether that, but I think furloughing someone and then having them work for you anyway, that is most definitely beyond the scope of the rules. So as they stand at the moment, there has been some talk about some amendment to the rules on that front, but I haven't seen that as yet. John,
I'll just come in there on one aspect of the furlough scheme that gets a little bit complicated, and that's if your church runs a preschool, and this is where the church itself is actually employing the people in the preschool, because the grants that are received by a preschool for the vouchers for providing preschool support, that money is continuing, and the Department of Education have put out guidance. It came out on the Friday as the furlough scheme was starting on the Monday, to say that if you're getting money for on the vouchers, then you have to take that into account in calculating your the amount of money you can claim under furlough.
Yep.
It's quite complicated, because you have to go back to your February payroll and work out not only the pay then, but also what income you had in, and in many cases, certainly the one that we run at our church, the money comes in lump sums at various stages, so you have to apportion it during the months and calculate what is the true income for February, and take that into account. So just look out for that one. But otherwise, the furlough scheme is basically for anyone. And there have been comments in the press about some of the large companies who have furloughed staff, while directors have continued to collect their vast paychecks, which I think is much more of an issue that HMRC will be interested in.
Thanks, John. So yeah. Hopefully that answers Andrew's question. Vivian has helpfully noted that yes, if you want to do your AGM online and use Zoom, that you can actually there is a telephone dial-in to a Zoom meeting, so somebody can join even if they don't have internet access, as long as they have access to a phone. And that is just a plain old telephone line. So you can, as long as you've got a phone that has a dial pad on it, you can use that. So that's a good comment.
Although one point on that is that you need to watch what the basis of their telephone billing is, because they could be billed for the time that they're on the phone meeting.
Yeah.
So if you're holding an hour's meeting on the phone, they could be running up quite a substantial bill.
Yep. So Andrew has asked, another Andrew, I think, has asked, have the Baptist Union made any representations to the government regarding the possibilities of furloughed workers being able to volunteer for the charity or church who employs them? So there have been some representations made by the Charity Tax Group, I believe, on this topic. I think it does get a little bit interesting as I say, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to be asking the government just to pay the salary of all our ministers and them to carry on doing the same job on a voluntary basis. I'm not sure that feels appropriate, but it might be the case that, for example, we've got somebody who volunteers. There have been issues where, say, somebody who volunteers for the church food bank but is also employed as the administrator in the office, we've had to advise that to keep strictly within what's written, they can't continue to volunteer if they've been furloughed. There may be scope for that, but as I say, I think we would advise churches to try and keep yourself completely clean on this front. So make sure that there is no ambiguity as to whether you are crossing the line into exploiting the government intention here, because at some level, all of our children and their children will probably be paying for the cost of this event.
Yeah, if they are furloughed, they can quite legitimately go off and volunteer or even work for a completely independent charity, providing the church has no connection with that charity.
Yeah, so I did. So we've also had a question in from Brian about the fact that I didn't answer Steve's question, which I just need to scroll back to, but I think was asking if at what point should trustees make decisions that would normally be taken by a church meeting. So I would generally refer you to leaflet L18 that's been written by our legal team, because that is actually a legal question and we're not lawyers. But as a general rule, the trustees have to take decisions that are in the best interest of the charity. And if they feel it's in the best interest of the charity to do something that is not normal governance for the charity, then as long as they follow that process and document it carefully, then they can. But as I say, please do read leaflet L18. And we also did a webinar on this topic back, I think, earlier in April, where Caroline Sanderson did cover that topic with Esther Campsall of Anthony Collins. If you have very particular issues about specific decisions you need to take in your church, then please do get in touch. We know that in Baptist churches there are a number of decisions that are normally referred to the church meeting, such as appointment and dismissal of ministers, or often staffing issues, or property purchases. So these can all be covered off. Okay, what if I can see? I'm sorry if I get your name wrong, but Aquasi has asked, what if you need to transfer funds from reserves but can't hold a church meeting to authorise the amount or contract signatories? I think that comes back to a legal issue, so that's essentially the same answer I just given about governance. So please refer to leaflet L18 or get in touch if you need specific advice.
Again, I'd say, going back to what I said earlier, that if you could get, for example, an email from the people who need to give authorization, that will be the people who are able to sign on the bank account or wherever the money is held, then do that and hold it, and then ratify it at a later meeting when you are able to meet.
Yeah. And there are things you could do, but as I say, L18 is a good place to go. And as I say, if you've got, rather than give not fully advice I'm not quite qualified to give, I'd suggest do that and come drop us an email on supportservices@baptist.org.uk with your particular challenge. I can see Steve is saying it was to do with investing in property. So yeah, do get in touch with us. We can help you through that detail.
Well, of course, Steve's comment about investing in property is another complication, because normally that's a special church meeting in most church constitutions. Exactly.
So I think we've done our best to answer all the questions. Actually, there is one question that was asked. Sorry, I've just realised we haven't answered, which is right back at the beginning. In fact, almost an hour before we started, someone called Simon asked about the financial support package that we're offering, saying that we gave them a 3-month payment holiday on their loan, and will we be extending that? The board of the Baptist Union Corporation is actually due to meet next month. We've had a number of extra board meetings in relation to these circumstances, and so the Baptist Union Corporation board are meeting next month, and we are reviewing whether we will extend the scheme. So watch this space. Clearly, we're watching what happens. Much of the government initial support was sort of structured around a sort of 3-month support window, and we matched that, thinking that if anybody knows what the expected plans are, it is the government, insofar as they know. So we matched that. We will be reviewing that, but it's not legally my decision, so I can't commit on that, but we will be thinking very carefully. So if you feel you are going to need more support along those lines, then please do get in touch and let us know, because that will help us in that decision making.
Yeah, it would. One of the things that will guide us is the sort of phase 3 of easing from the lockdown as to when that might happen and what might be included in that, which may be from July onwards. But I suspect even if it is July, it will be very gradual and very slow. And as churches, we would need to be quite cautious in terms of the way we move forwards. So that will all be taken into account in that review.
Yep. We just had a quick question. I was about to wind us up then, but Leslie says, so a paid worker who is furloughed definitely can't volunteer in a completely different area within the church. I'm afraid at this moment in time, no. It's really quite straightforward. Yeah. As I say, there has been some talk about maybe that might be relaxed a bit, but at this moment in time, even if it's something that has nothing to do with their day job that they've been furloughed from, I'm afraid they cannot volunteer within the church.
Yeah.
That is a no-no.
Again, what they can do is volunteer in another church, but not their own.
No, not the one that is their employer.
Yes.
So, okay. Well, thank you. It's been an hour and a quarter. It's been a fairly intense hour and a quarter from our side. I hope it's been helpful to you. I can see throughout most of that time, we've had well over 100 people on the stream. So I'm hoping that implies that, and the fact that there are still well over 100 implies that we were saying some useful stuff. If you want to get in touch with us, the contact details are on the screen. Do keep an eye on our website, which we're relatively continuously updating with baptist.org.uk/corona is the site we've been using. As I've said before, this broadcast, this webinar will be available as a full replay on the website on exactly this same page on the YouTube channel going forward. And if you have particular questions, best email address is probably supportservices@baptist.org.uk, and we will try and answer every question we get in to the best of our ability. Some topics that come in, I'm afraid we aren't able to advise on, but most things in Baptist church life we can give you some advice. So I'd like to thank John. I think this is John's webinar debut for us, so thank you, John. It's been very helpful.
Yeah. And
John Levick, our treasurer.
Yeah, as we finish, just a final verse from me. With all of this that's going on, you may want to just throw everything up in the air and say help, because it's all too difficult. But 1 Corinthians 15, there's a verse there that reminds us, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So as we finish, say thank you to all of you as treasurers who do what is not the easiest of jobs in our churches. And sometimes we're aware that some of you have taken it on, not because you've got the skills, but because there's been no one else to do it. So we want to say thank you to you and want to support you as much as we can.
Thank you for that, John. And God bless you all. And as I say, we are here to help you as best we can. And so please do use the email address supportservices@baptist.org.uk. So that's the end of it. My name's Richard Wilson. I'm the support services team leader at the Union, and John has been a great help throughout this. So thank you, and I can see thank you to those who are making nice comments in the chat. We hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye. We'll try and give